Before we begin, listen closely, because this is not just the story of one murder. It is the story of a woman whose life slipped through the cracks before anyone realized how much danger had been moving around her. It is the story of a town where everybody had seen a man in a van, but almost nobody truly knew him. It is the story of a detective who started with a body, a broken piece of plastic, and a smell no officer could ignore, then followed those small clues into a darkness that may not have ended with one victim. And by the end of this story, one question will still be waiting in the shadows. If Michelle was not the first, how many others were never found? So subscribe, stay with me until the end, and do not look away too early. Because in this case, the most terrifying detail was not what police found at the beginning. It was what they feared they had only started to uncover. It began in Marathon, Florida, in a place where the sun can make even ordinary water look peaceful. Families moved through the afternoon, as if the day belonged to them. Cars passed over the road. Fishermen worked the edges of the water. Tourists came and went, carrying the lightness of people who believed danger was somewhere else. Near Vaca Cut Bridge, the world still looked normal from a distance. The kind of place where someone might stop to fish, take a breath, or watch the current move beneath the bridge. But then came the smell. At first, it was only something wrong in the air. Strong, heavy, impossible to explain away. A fisherman noticed it and followed it, probably hoping it was debris, an animal, anything other than what the human mind fears before it fully understands. Then he saw enough to know he needed help immediately. When officers arrived, the ordinary afternoon was over. On the ground was a woman. She had no identification. No clothing, no easy answer attached to her. She was not just dead, she had been discarded. That was the first cruelty. Before investigators even knew her name, they could already see that someone had tried to reduce her to a problem left near the road. At first, there was a possible explanation. The current near the bridge could be dangerous. People drowned, accidents happened. In a place surrounded by water, tragedy could sometimes arrive without a criminal hand behind it. But then officers looked closer. There were marks around her neck. There was blood. There were scrapes and signs of trauma. The ground itself seemed to tell a story the killer had not fully erased. A hand looked as if it had been dragged. Hair appeared away from the body. Branches were broken. Plants were disturbed. Tire tracks cut through the area like a rough signature left behind by someone who thought panic was faster than evidence. In those first minutes, police did not yet have a victim's name. They did not yet have a suspect. They did not even have a clean timeline. But they had one thing that mattered. This was no accident, and if the person who did this was still nearby, every passing minute gave him more time to disappear. Detective Matt Pitcher was not expecting an easy case. In fact, the timing alone was a problem. It was Thanksgiving season, the kind of week when people travel, businesses get crowded, and surveillance footage can vanish before anyone thinks to preserve it. Marathon was a tourist area. People came through and left, vehicles passed, faces blurred. If the wrong person got even a small head start, the case could turn cold before the woman was even identified. Pitcher arrived to a scene that did not offer much, but it did offer enough for a detective willing to notice what others might step over. There were tire tracks near the gravel road. There were strands of hair, there were broken branches that looked fresh, not old. And then there was a small piece of something that should not have been there. A broken piece from a vehicle, lying near the disturbed area like a clue that had fallen out of the killer's own escape. To most people, it would have looked like junk. To investigators, it was possibility. The piece was small, but it suggested that whoever came there had not left cleanly. A vehicle may have struck branches or scraped against brush. The killer may have driven into the area, dumped Michelle's body, and damaged the vehicle while rushing away. That meant somewhere in town, there might be a vehicle with a fresh wound. And if there was a vehicle, there might be cameras. Pitcher made a choice. While the scene was being processed and the body was taken for autopsy, he pushed the investigation outward. Officers needed to identify the woman, but they also needed to preserve surveillance footage before it was overwritten, deleted, or buried under a holiday rush. Bars, restaurants, gas stations, stores, parking lots, any place with a camera might have caught the damaged vehicle. But there was a cruel problem. They did not know who she was. Without a name, Michelle was only a face in a graphic photograph that officers had to carry from business to business, asking strangers to look at someone in death and tell them who she had been in life. That is one of the quiet injustices in true crime, the part that rarely gets enough attention. Some people disappear and alarms go off immediately. Phones ring, Families call police. Social media fills with photos. Search parties gather, but others can vanish without a missing person report. They can be loved and still be disconnected. They can have children, memories, a past, a heart, a laugh, and still end up unidentified because life has pushed them far from the people who would have known they were gone. Michelle was not invisible because she did not matter. She was invisible because society often stops looking closely at people once they are struggling. Officers went to local businesses. They asked bartenders, employees, anyone who might recognize her. At first, there was nothing. No name, no address, no clear place to begin. Each no stretched the distance between Michelle and justice. Then one bartender looked at the photograph and recognized her. Not her name, not at first, but her face. The bartender had seen her before. Another person recognized her too. They remembered that she had worked at a nearby restaurant, Sunset Grill. Suddenly, Michelle was no longer a stranger at the edge of the bridge. She was a woman someone had served with, spoken to, seen moving through the world alive. At the restaurant, the details began to form around her. She was 51 years old. Her name was Michelle. She had family in Wisconsin. She had children. She had once had a different life, one that included work, relationships, and people who still deserved to know what happened to her. Her employer described her with sadness, not as a case file, not as evidence, but as a person. She had a good heart. She had talked about her children. She had been trying, even if life had become hard. That mattered, because the killer did not just take a life. He tried to take her identity, her dignity, her connection to the world. But piece by piece, people gave it back. And now that Michelle had a name, the investigation could turn fully toward the person who had taken it from her. The broken vehicle parts became the next key. Captain sent a photo of the piece to someone who knew cars. The answer came back fast. It appeared to belong to a full-size van, not just any vehicle, a van. That was important, because a van can be transportation, shelter, hiding place, crime scene, and evidence locker all at once. It can move through town and disappear into parking lots. It can look ordinary enough that people stop noticing it, especially in a place where tourists, workers, and people living out of vehicles may come and go. Officers combed through hours of surveillance footage, looking for the right shape, the right color, the right damage. For a long time, they found nothing. The case leaned on patience. Every camera angle mattered. Every minute of footage mattered. Somewhere, if they were lucky, a vehicle carrying the truth had passed through the frame, then they saw it. A black and silver Dodge conversion van. Damaged. Missing pieces. Moving through town at a time that mattered. The license plate gave them a name, Stephen Matthew Wolfe. And that name changed the temperature of the case. Wolfe was not just a man who happened to own a damaged van. He had a serious, violent past. Decades earlier, as a teenager in Idaho, he had been convicted in a homicide case. He had spent many years in prison. He had escaped custody once. He had a history that suggested violence was not new to him, and that frightened investigators because Michelle's murder was already showing signs of extreme brutality. Now the question became larger than where Wolfe had been that day. The question became what kind of man had been living inside that van, moving through a town where people had seen him, but did not truly know him. By midnight, investigators believed the van might still be nearby. It had disappeared from the camera trail around a cluster of businesses. If Wolfe had not left town, he might be sleeping in the same vehicle that police believed was connected to Michelle's death. That possibility made the search urgent. A dozen officers moved into the area. Parking lots, fast food places, stores, the kind of commercial spaces that look empty and harmless at night, until one vehicle becomes the center of everything. Then, near a McDonald's and a Winn-Dixie, they saw it. The van. The same black and silver van, sitting there quietly, too quietly. Officers surrounded the area. They had to think about bystanders, crossfire, the possibility of someone inside, the possibility of a suspect desperate enough to run or fight. The van was not just a vehicle now. It was a sealed box, and no one knew what waited inside. Commands cut through the night. Hands. Step out. Do not reach. Move back, Stephen Wolfe emerged. And he was calm. That calm was chilling in its own way. He did not explode. He did not immediately run. He did not behave like a man shocked to be surrounded by law enforcement. He gave his name, he confirmed the van was his. He acted as if this were another inconvenience, another moment to talk his way through. But officers moved toward the vehicle, and almost immediately, one of them noticed the damage. The missing piece matched what had been found at the scene. Then came the smell. It was the same kind of detail that had started everything near the bridge, the kind the human body recognizes before the mind wants to name it. Officers looked at the van, at the damage, at what they could smell, and suddenly the case seemed to tighten around Wolf. But it still was not enough. That is what makes investigations so difficult and so important. Suspicion is not a conviction. A broken vehicle part is powerful, but defense attorneys can argue coincidence. A suspect can claim he was near the scene for innocent reasons. A jury needs more than instinct. They need proof. So Wolf was taken to the station, and Detective Pitcher prepared for the next battlefield, the interrogation room. Pitcher understood something many people forget when they watch true crime from a distance. An interview is not only about questions, it is about timing, ego, silence, pressure, and control. A suspect may come in with a plan. A detective must figure out what that plan is without showing his own hand too early. Pitcher did not begin by accusing Wolf of murder. He began with the day. Walk me through it. That was the opening. Calm, ordinary, almost casual. Wolf explained that he had gone near the bridge because he was looking for a place to sleep. He said the van was damaged because he tried to turn around and got caught among branches. In one sense, it sounded like an explanation. In another sense, it placed him at the exact area investigators cared about. That is the strange thing about lies. Sometimes, to explain one piece of evidence, a suspect has to admit being closer to the truth than he intended. Pitcher watched him. Listen to him. Let him talk. Then he looked at Wolf's hands. No obvious scratches. That was unexpected. If Michelle had fought, if Wolf had dragged her through brush, if there had been a violent struggle, shouldn't there be marks? The absence of scratches did not clear him, but it complicated things. And Pitcher knew the case was not yet strong enough to rely on confidence alone. Wolf also knew the system. He had been in trouble before. He had lived through interrogations, charges, confinement. He was not a frightened first-time suspect who might collapse under the first hard question. So for the moment, he remained in custody while investigators searched for the missing pieces. And somewhere outside that room, people in Marathon began talking. The next morning, tips started coming in. People who knew Wolf, people who had seen the van, people who suddenly realized their names, fingerprints, or memories might be connected to a murder investigation. One woman came forward and explained that someone she knew had been inside Wolf's van before the murder. Another person, Tracy, confirmed she had ridden with Wolf and someone else. She was shaken, afraid. The van had been close enough to her life that Michelle's death did not feel distant. It felt like a warning, then another name surfaced. Terry. Terry knew Michelle. Terry had also had contact with Wolf. Investigators discovered a call between Terry and Wolf around the time that mattered. That made Terry important, possibly as a witness, possibly as something else. When detectives went to speak with him, Terry did not want to talk. He had distrust in his voice, the kind of distrust that does not come from one bad day, but from a life of feeling watched, judged, or trapped by systems that do not always protect people like him. He resisted. He snapped. He made it clear he knew how police could twist a person's words. That moment carries another social truth in this story. In communities where people are struggling, cooperation with police is not simple. Some people fear being blamed. Some fear old warrants, past accusations, or being pulled into something bigger than themselves. Some have seen law enforcement fail them before. And sometimes that fear helps dangerous people move freely because witnesses stay silent until fear of the killer becomes stronger than fear of the system. Detectives shifted strategy. They mentioned the phone call. Wolf had called Terry. Records proved it. That changed things. Terry finally opened a door. He said Wolf did not like Michelle. He said Wolf threatened her. He said Michelle had stayed in Wolf's van. He said they had fought. And in his own rough, emotional way, Terry made it clear that Michelle had mattered to him. She was not just a woman from the streets. She was someone he cared about, someone whose death hurt him. That testimony mattered because it connected Wolf and Michelle directly. It also showed something ugly and familiar. Vulnerable women often live near danger long before the world calls it danger. Threats become background noise. Fights become their business. People see the red flags but do not always know how to intervene. or they do not believe anyone will listen, or the victim has nowhere safer to go. Michelle had been close to the man now suspected of killing her, and he had been sleeping inside the vehicle police believed became part of the crime. Back at the station, Pitcher studied Wolf more closely, not just his words, but his psychology. Wolf talked about prison, about women, about experiences that disturbed even an experienced detective. There were flashes of resentment, anger, and manipulation. Pitcher began to believe that pushing too hard too early might cause Wolf to shut down completely, so he did something different. He offered him a cigarette. Outside the interrogation room, in the open air, the tone shifted. Wolf seemed more emotional there, less controlled. Maybe the walls of the station had helped him perform, but outside, with smoke in his hand and a detective beside him, the mask began to crack. Wolf said he was being charged with homicide. Pitcher did not deny the seriousness. He let Wolf feel the weight. Then Wolf said something that sounded like the beginning of a confession, but not the kind detectives expected. Somebody had died, he admitted, but not by his hands. Then came the twist. Wolf claimed Michelle's boyfriend killed her. According to Wolf, he had picked up Michelle and a man at a Walmart in Florida City. He claimed they were in the back of the van, that they fought, that the man killed her, and that Wolf panicked. He said he helped move the body because he was afraid, not because he had committed the murder. It was a story designed to do one thing: move him from killer to witness, from predator to coward, from murderer to man who made a terrible mistake after the fact. And for a moment, the story had just enough shape to demand attention, because Michelle did have an ex-boyfriend who had reportedly harassed her online. Investigators had seen that name. They could not ignore it. In a murder case, tunnel vision can destroy justice. A good detective has to test even the lies, because sometimes truth hides inside a suspect's self-serving story. So Pitcher asked for a description. Wolf described the supposed killer as young, thin, with dark hair. But the man investigators knew about did not match that description. He was older. He had a different build, different hair, different presence. Wolf's story began to bend under its own weight, and while he was talking, another part of the investigation was moving without him. The search warrant on the van was being executed. Investigators went inside the space where Wolf lived, slept, drove, and hid whatever he thought belonged to him. They found bedding. They found areas that had to be cut apart and removed. They found blood evidence, hair, clothing items that raised new concerns. The van was no longer just a vehicle with exterior damage, it was becoming a crime scene. And then came the evidence that narrowed the room around Wolf. Michelle's hair, Michelle's clothing, blood beneath the bedding. DNA evidence tying her to the van. The mystery man was fading. The van was speaking. Pitcher returned to the interrogation room with a different energy. The soft approach had served its purpose. The cigarette, the rapport, the careful listening, all of it had kept Wolf talking long enough for the evidence to catch up. Now the detective confronted him. The victim's hair was there. Her clothing was there. Blood was there. Wolf denied it, explained, deflected. Claimed the clothing belonged to someone else. Claimed the blood could be his. Claimed confusion. But every answer sounded smaller than the evidence. Then Pitcher said the thing the room had been moving toward all along. He told Wolf directly that he had murdered her. Wolf denied it again. But denial no longer had the same power. A confession can be powerful, but it is not the only form of truth. Sometimes the body tells the truth. Sometimes the road tells the truth. Sometimes a broken branch, a missing bumper piece, a camera clip, a strand of hair, and blood under a sheet tell the truth together. And in this case, the truth was gathering. There was one more disturbing layer in the interrogation. Pitcher later described a strange bond that Wolf seemed to form with him. At one point, when Pitcher placed a hand on his shoulder, Wolf reacted in a way that suggested the gesture meant something unusually personal to him. The detective realized that Wolf might be seeing their interaction not as an investigation, but almost as a relationship. That is chilling because manipulation in interrogation can move both ways. Detectives build rapport to get the truth. Suspects may try to use that rapport to soften consequences, create sympathy, or control the emotional atmosphere. In Wolf's case, it seemed as though he wanted Pitcher to believe in him, or at least to feel conflicted about him. But Pitcher did not lose sight of Michelle. The case was not about Wolf's need to be understood. It was about a woman who had been found near a bridge without her name, without her dignity, and without the chance to speak for herself. That is where true crime must be careful. It is easy to become fascinated with the killer's mind, the strange details, the performance, the lies. But social justice begins when we refuse to let the victim disappear into the shadow of the person who harmed her. Michelle Osborne was not a clue. She was a mother, a woman from Wisconsin, a person remembered as kind. A person whose life had become complicated but never worthless. A person who should have been protected before the final violence, not only investigated after it. By the time the forensic evidence was assembled, Wolf's version of events had little room left to stand. The state's case moved forward. The broken vehicle part connected the van to the scene. The surveillance footage tracked the van. Witnesses connected Michelle to Wolf. The search connected Michelle to the inside of the van. The blood and physical evidence told a story that Wolf's denial could not erase. In January 2023, Stephen Matthew Wolf was convicted. In June 2023, he was sentenced to death. For many people, that would be the end of the story. The killer caught, the case solved, justice delivered, but this story does not settle that easily. Because after investigators searched the van, after they considered Wolf's history, after they looked at the items found inside and the unknown gaps in his movements over the years, some of them were left with a fear they could not prove fully in court. Michelle might not have been the only one. In 2025, the Florida Supreme Court upheld Wolf's conviction and death sentence. Legally, the case against him stood. Publicly, the name Stephen Matthew Wolf became tied to one of the most disturbing crimes in the Keys. But the legal ending did not answer every human question. A courtroom can decide guilt. It cannot always recover every truth. Somewhere, there may be someone who once rode in that van and got out alive, never realizing how close they came. Somewhere, there may be a family that never connected their missing loved one to a man in Florida. Somewhere, there may be a forgotten report, a faded memory, a rumor from a parking lot, a woman's name spoken once and then lost. And the only person who may know the full truth has every reason to stay silent. So tonight, as this story ends, remember where it began. Fishermen followed something wrong in the air. Police found a woman the killer thought he had left behind. A detective noticed a broken piece that should have been forgotten, and a van parked under the lights of a quiet Florida night became the doorway to a question still waiting for an answer. Because if Michelle was not the first, then the real ending of this story has not been found yet, and somewhere, hidden in the years, Stephen Wolf still refuses to explain. There may be another name waiting to be spoken.